I will now call to order the Monday, November 21st, 2011 informational meeting of the Sioux Falls City Council. Welcome to all of you here at Carnegie Town Hall, those watching us on Channel 16, and those that are following the meeting on siouxfalls.org. We'll start today with a staff report from Interim City Clerk Sue Roust. Sue?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Council. I think you should each have a copy of my report at your place. I think. Okay. Just a few general items related to tonight's agenda. Another new addition to the consent agenda is that now fuel bids are going to be listed on your agenda and recorded in the minutes. This is the result of an audit finding that will be discussed at tomorrow's audit committee meeting, but we wanted to get going right away on responding to that, and so you will see that on there today. It's not anything you need to take action on, but all fuel bids need to be recorded in the minutes. Secondly, we had a question last week about the new process we had for the council approving agreements and contracts. The initial wording we had put on the consent agenda was notice of agreements and contracts as reported by the mayor, and we've changed that now to make it clear that the council is approving those agreements, not just receiving notice of them. According to your ordinance, you do just receive notice of amendments and change orders, so that is correct. One further note on the agenda tonight, there will be a walk-in action for two contracts which need to be approved by the 26th but did not get on the regular weekly memo. I think we are going to continue to see a little bit of shakeout on the implementation of the new ordinance on council approval of contracts, and there may be one or two more glitches, but I think for the most part it's worked quite smoothly. We haven't reached the point yet of needing to call a special meeting because of a contract that absolutely needs to be approved 1 week. I suspect that is coming sometime in the future, and when it does, you'll deal with it. Just a final note, on a personal note, I will be gone all next week. The other thing I wanted to bring back to you again that I brought up briefly last week was the legislative priorities. I've provided you with a copy, and here's another one attached, of the resolution that you passed last year with your legislative priorities. And I talked to Yvonne Taylor at South Dakota Municipal League just to find out what had happened with all of these for your review. You had a proposal to support a local option tax to raise funds for a specified purpose, also known as the 1 cent sales tax, and that was proposed to the legislature and was unsuccessful. You had a priority for funding, supporting increased funding to meet transportation needs. That was the license plate fees that did pass, and the city is receiving more funds because of that. Increasing 911 fees was on the list last year, and that was unsuccessful. And Chief Barthel has already sent you some information that he will continue to work on this through the 911 Coordination Board. I believe they have a meeting coming up to discuss their legislative plans. The fourth thing you had on last year's resolution was an internet website for background checks on daycare centers and liquor license applicants. Ms. Taylor told me that was not proposed as legislation because of privacy issues. The internet component adds some real concerns about people being able to get on there and see people's potential records or other things. Ms. Taylor said that if it was desired to pursue this, it would probably have to be worked through with the Federal Department of Justice and the State Department of Social Services. And so she didn't know where that one would be going, but suggested it would take a lot of background work. The proposed 2012 priorities that we've heard so far just in asking and gathering are, number one, 911 fees again, a law to combat the growing use of synthetic marijuana. That also came from Chief Barthel. And Ms. Taylor pointed out to me there was a law passed last year to kind of give a more generic spin to that, because what happens is law enforcement is always playing catch up. Every year they come in with a list of all the new drugs that somebody has made up during the year, and then, of course, there are brand new ones out on the street the next day. And so there is a law in place that is addressing that in some ways, but I suspect Chief Barthel wants more there. An item that came up last week was the issue of procedures for surplusing zoo animals, which may be of interest to the City of Sioux Falls and Watertown as the two cities that have zoos, and that may be one you will be working on. And then the one I had suggested was the support of use of voting centers, as was used in the May 2011 Sioux Falls School Board election. The Secretary of State will be bringing that legislation, presumably with an emergency clause, so it could be used next spring. And he would certainly love to have the support of the City of Sioux Falls as he presents this to the legislature. I know that the mayor has sent out communications to all the department directors asking for their input and is still in the process of getting their input, so I don't know what you would like to do at this point. Your next regular meeting is December 5th. We could make up a resolution for you to consider then, but if you waited until the 12th, I think that would be more time for the administration to get things together.
Questions or comments? Councilor Jameson? Did you?
Yes. Just have you or the council leadership, has anybody requested a list from council members of what they would like to have discussed? Did I miss that? Maybe I did.
No, we just brought up last week that we would be discussing it.
Okay.
So, yeah, so that this needs to be also compiled.
And I sent out an email with some of this information, but just on Friday.
But were you looking for feedback and or recommendations as what councilors would want?
I'm looking for anything that the council would like to add into a priority list. We can put the wording together if you give us direction on what your priorities are. So that's what I'm looking for, either now or in the next couple of weeks.
If I could add a couple. And I think it's good probably for all of us to reflect a little bit. When I look back and think of this, I think of the liquor license issue that we have, where we have people come in front of us and say they violated the underage liquor sale license, but we have no authority to affect the outcome. We just sit here and listen and absorb it all and move on, but I think we need teeth in that some way for us to help. The other is the daycare issue. I think those two issues, at least in my mind, and the experience that I've had on the council, we could use a little help from our friends and peer. So if I could add those two.
And I did have a meeting with Jill Franken in the Health Department, and we have started talking about something for the daycare issue, bringing it forward. So I concur with that. Councilor Erpenbach.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. One, I want us to take this a little more seriously maybe. I know we've always put this list together of priorities, and we've always just kind of put that list out there and then said, here's our priorities, good luck, So I hope that we will consider this seriously. And there are a couple of things. I looked through the list. Sue Roust sent us the Municipal League Statement of Policy. It's also been available in your Municipal League magazine. A couple of things that relate to Sioux Falls that seem to relate to Sioux Falls, in addition to the things that Councilor Jameson is talking about. Number 64 on the list has to do with state load limits for trucks on municipal streets and bridges. I think that's something that we might want to think about. And I haven't done any research on any of these. These are just ones that came to my head. But number 65 has to do with the Big Sioux River Basin Management Plan. I think that we maybe need to follow up on that and find out if that's, again, we talked about this last week or the week before. If it's South Dakota Municipal League Statement of Policy, are we going to help them go after it? Are we going to help that policy become reality? And so that's something that might be important to us. Couple of others, number 85 and number 88, have to do with administrative resolutions and special assessments. And then one in particular that I know Director Cotter has worked on, I think, is number 78. It has to do with bid requirements for stormwater retention ponds. And then I think we need to add number 107 that's on the list to our priorities as well. It's exempting municipal projects and facilities and equipment from sales and use taxes. So no matter who does the building or who manages the building in terms of like an event center, that because it's owned by the city, that you wouldn't have to pay sales tax. That company that's doing the managing or that's doing the construction wouldn't have to pay sales tax. There would be some real savings for us as a city, I think. So all of those are ones that I'd like us to think about at least, and I'll put them into a memo. But again, I was just kind of reviewing last night.
Councilor Brown, thank you.
Councilor Erpenbach's right in that South Dakota Municipal League has a long list of potential legislation that could affect cities. I think our purpose really is to narrow that down to our top 3 or 4 and give in one sheet. So we need to be giving serious thought to what our priority 3 or 4 legislative items are, and probably based off of what the priorities will be with Municipal League and us lending our voice behind that.
That's if I might, that's exactly right, and I think that one of the reasons we asked the mayor to we wanted to see his list as well was that council and administration maybe want to work together on this. I keep thinking that if the administration is sending someone to Pierre to lobby the legislature at some point, it makes a whole lot of sense to have an elected official in the car with them so that we're up there helping. You know, staff is great and they do a great job, but it puts a lot of power behind it if we have elected officials either writing letters or being there, actually being in Pierre. So I think that, yeah, we need to figure out what those top things are, but then let's really get behind them and do something about it.
Councilor Anderson, Jr.
I guess another one to add to the list would be to make sure that the state continues to fund our highway project 100. That was part of an agreement with the city that we would take care of interior roadways and that they would take care of Highway 100 and the loop around Sioux Falls and that area. And I think after next year, I have not seen any additional funding for that.
We need to give Mrs. Rouse direction. I would say that because of the information we also want to get from the administration, that we would look at getting this resolution probably on the December 15th.
12th.
Or 12th, the December 12th agenda. And I would suggest that you continue to feed information to the clerk's office, and then at our informational the previous week, we'll go through them all. Does that work for all of you? Councilor Erpenbach.
Then the other thing I'd like to add is that we do have the legislative breakfast with the city and the counties and the school boards that we meet at Leonardo's, and I can't remember what day it is.
21st.
21st of December.
It's
where we'll have
third Wednesday, right?
Third Wednesday. Leonardo's early in the morning. That's one of those times, I mean, there's lots of opportunities, but that's one of those times when it's really, we talk face-to-face with legislators, and it's really about local issues. And so I'd like us to have that resolution in hand to be able to walk in there and say, hey, here are the things that this council is really pushing for.
So if we have the discussion on the 5th and then we have the vote on the 12th, I think that should work well for that particular meeting. Any other questions or comments? If not, thank you. Next, we'll have a recap from Councilor Anderson, Jr. on Monday, November 14th's Public Service Committee meeting.
At the Public Services Committee meeting on Monday, November 14th, we got an update on the zoo agreement. Dave Fisher updated us on the management agreement and any of the changes that were going to be made. That information will also be given to us today at the informational. The other item that we discussed was an amendment to Ordinance 14-85, increasing the time between the annual election and the runoff election from 2 to 3 weeks. The information was given to us by City Clerk Sue Rouse, and she explained the reasoning why they wanted the extra week as far as following state law and allowing enough time for others to get registered. And that is also going to be first reading on December 5th, with a second reading scheduled for December 12th.
Any questions for Councilor Anderson Jr.? If not, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll now go on to City Council open discussion. Councilor Erpenbach.
Thank you. I didn't even raise my hand. First of all, Councilor Aguilar and I went to the Mayor's Neighborhood Summit on Saturday, and we missed all of you. It was really interesting. It was a great group of folks talking about solutions and issues and things that have worked in neighborhoods. It was, and we got into small groups and large groups, and it was just a great experience. So I thank the Mayor and his staff for putting that together. I know that Adam Roach and Russ Sorensen had the biggest roles in getting that together. So I appreciate that. If you have questions about it, there will be notes from all of the small group discussions on SiouxFalls.org within the next couple of weeks, so that you can kind of follow up with that. Then the other thing that I wanted to bring up, it's kind of been a backstage conversation, just sort of what do you think, what if kind of conversation about the possibility of changing our meeting date from Monday evenings to Tuesday evenings. And there are some potential benefits in terms of deadlines for those contracts and some of the issues that we have kind of walking in at the last minute. So I wonder if Sue Roust would talk to that just a little bit in terms of benefits. I mean, I see it as, gosh, we might be able to get a little more time in for study and maybe get a little bit of personal time. Some counselors are running around weekends and those kinds of things. So there's some real benefits, I think.
Sue?
And perhaps City Attorney Fifley might want to chime in on this too. But what we find now is that things can come up over the weekend, and it's a real scramble to make any adjustment to your agenda on Monday because you're past the deadline. You have a 24-hour deadline for giving public notice of your meetings. If you met on a Tuesday, then you could still get an agenda published on Monday at the end of the day, and people would have a better idea. One other thing is just a smaller item, but the Sioux Falls School Board meets on Monday nights. And so if you were on Tuesday nights, you wouldn't ever conflict with them. I think there are several other things that could be talked about as part of this subject, is reviewing our whole schedule of deadlines. City Attorney Fifley and I have talked some about that, but the key thing is if you wanted us to move forward with any sort of discussion of perhaps fleshing out a proposal for changing to a Tuesday meeting, we could discuss the other items that kind of go along with it and see if there are other ways to streamline your processes.
Any comments?
If I might, that was a huge part of it for me, is we've looked at how sort of strict, how stringent some of those deadlines are, and they're quite a distance ahead of when in time from when we actually meet. And state law, open meetings law, only requires a 24-hour notice of what's going to be on the agenda, and I still, from my standpoint, would want as much of it as possible so that we do have that weekend to do the homework and those sorts of things. But I think there'd be some real value in that idea of kind of slacking those deadlines just a little bit, so that there is time on Monday for those last-minute items and for things to be changed around a little bit. And the other thing is holidays. We very often get moved to Tuesday anyway because of holidays. So I think there's a lot of arguments for it.
Any other comments? Councilor Entenmann.
I personally think it's correct. Monday's always a cycle event for most of us coming off the weekend, most of our involved in business. There's a lot of stuff to do. So I agree. I think Tuesdays are definitely worth looking at. I'd like to see some.
Any other comments? Councilor Jameson.
Yeah, I'm not overly concerned about moving it to Tuesday. Monday Night Football becomes available. Not that that's one of my things, but it would become probably something I would do. But I think if we could just follow up maybe on the problems that we would solve, if we could identify those in a good list so we know why we're changing it and that we're able to overcome a handful or a group of problems, I think that would be helpful for us to make a sound decision. I don't know that anybody's married to Monday for any reason, but if we can solve some problems for scheduling for staff and or publication of some sort, I'm all for it.
Any other comments? It sounds like a very positive beginning to this, and we'll ask the city clerk to continue to work with the city attorney's office and come back to us again with that list of the positives and possibly if they can come up with any negatives. And we'll take it from there. Any other comments? Any other council open discussion? Councilor Jameson.
Just a reminder that we have an audit committee meeting tomorrow at 4 here, and there's 4 items or so on the agenda: a neighborhood redevelopment audit, fuel audit, school-based health clinics audit, and probably most importantly, the 2012 audit plan. And I think all of you should know what that plan is. And there's always a time for you to interject and add a new item to be in the plan, but we just need as much notice as we can to get it done. The council has the authority and the ability to request a special audit if something they feel fit. But tomorrow at 4 o'clock here, if you're interested, the audit committee meets. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other council open discussion? If not, I have 2 items. First of all, I sent out an email with the new seating arrangement that will take place on December 1. If I receive no comments, it's done. It's a done deal. Secondly, the mayor has requested us to discuss how often, now that the event center project has passed, how often do we want updates? You saw that in the conversation we had that he thought that maybe monthly was too often and maybe quarterly wasn't enough. Any feedback at this point? Councilor Rolfing.
I don't think that monthly is too often at all on this type of project. I would think that monthly would be an appropriate amount of time between reports, even if they're short and small. There will be times when they will be long, but we need to be brought up to date and kept up to date on what's happening with this.
Any other thoughts? Councilor Jameson.
If I could, I would just urge the administration to use as much of their knowledge and expertise about when we should be updated. You know, I think certainly all of us are interested in it, but you know, monthly, routinely on little mundane projects I'm not real interested in, but if the administration feels it's necessary, I would leave it up to their judgment to bring it forward. And not schedule it just because we have to schedule it out 12 times or 4 times a year, just as needed, certainly as needed.
Any other comments? Leadership will then continue to work with the mayor to determine the scheduling. Councilor Karski.
I guess one thing, if we could have a list of, and I believe it's already out there, milestones that exist that we're going to be crossing with the construction of the event center, and maybe after those milestones have passed, to give us an update to make sure that we're still on schedule and that type of thing. You know, when does the bid letting begin? When does it finish? You know, when does construction begin, et cetera. You know, that way we have a timeline, and we can pick when we would like to hear about what we're doing on that timeline, I guess, would be my suggestion, instead of you know, I'd like to leave it up to them to bring it to us when they like to, but I'd also like to kind of know at certain milestones where we're at.
And I'm sure we will get a list of that sort, and maybe we can then judge from that list. Any other comments? If not, we'll go on to today's presentations. Our first is Lewis and Clark Row Water System Update. We'll ask Troy Larson, the Executive Director of Lewis and Clark, to brief us.
Madam
Welcome.
Chair, members of the council, thank you very much for the invitation to provide an update to you. 2 things I'll be covering tonight: update on construction as well as funding, and answer any questions that you may have. You've been provided a map showing the progress currently that's been made on the project. The red area is construction that has been completed. Blue are the two emergency connections we have where we're buying water from one source and reselling it to another, in this case buying it from Sioux Falls, reselling it to T in Harrisburg, as well as buying water from Sioux Center and reselling it to Hull. The yellow areas are where construction is ready to go as soon as federal funding is available, and we'll talk a little more about that. And right now, the project as a whole is 65% complete. It may not look that way on the map, but in terms of the dollars, that's how far we're along. And the reason for that, as we get to these smaller diameter pipelines, obviously it costs a lot less to put in a mile of pipe than the main transmission line and other big infrastructure. We are wrapping up construction on 9 different contracts. The water treatment plant is expected to be completed in mid-April. That's the current substantial completion deadline. The contractor is currently 30 days behind schedule, but the liquidated damages are $7,500 a day, so they feel confident they will be able to make up that time between now and April and have it ready to go by then. The map shows those members in red, those first 11 members who will be receiving water when the plant is operational in the spring. Of those members, Minnehaha Community Water Corp. has 3 connections. Only one of their connections will be made at that time. And Rock Rapids, Iowa has 2 connections, and only one will be made in 2012. We are also working on a wells project near Vermilion, 2 7.5 million gallon reservoirs near T, a pump station near T, 2 pipeline projects southeast of Sioux Falls that are part of the Minnesota transmission line. Also, we have 2 contracts for 7 meter houses, including a meter house for Sioux Falls at Benson Road. That's a 9 million gallon a day meter house. Those meter houses will be done in January. We also are working to commission the pipeline. That's clean and disinfect the pipeline so it's ready to deliver treated water. No new construction can be awarded until federal funding is restored, so we are just wrapping up the construction currently underway, but no new construction is planned. Before I go on to funding, any questions about where we're at with construction? In terms of funding, you've read about this quite often, but just a quick recap. After receiving a record $27 million from appropriators in fiscal year 2009, that amount was reduced to $10 million in 2010 and only $2 million in 2011. We need $35 million to keep the project on schedule, which is currently 4 years behind schedule. If we were hypothetically ever to get $35 million, that will not make up the 4 years we're behind schedule. It would only keep us on pace from that point forward. The President has only proposed $493,000 for fiscal year 2012, which is not enough to cover administrative expenses, let alone any construction. Unfortunately, the earmark ban in place includes authorized projects. So funding levels for 2012 and 2013 will depend on the amount included in the President's budget. Our 3 governors from Iowa, South Dakota, and Minnesota sent a joint letter to the President on November 2nd urging increased funding for the project. That was a day before the tri-state delegation met in an unprecedented meeting with the Secretary of the Interior, the number 2 person at the Office of Management and Budget, and the Commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation. At that meeting, our tri-state delegation urged increased funding using the rationale that we're about 65% complete, jobs on the front end through construction and manufacturing, as well as jobs through the back end with expanded economic development opportunities. They also stressed that of all the rural water projects, this one has by far the largest population that will be served. And also the delegation stressed the prepayment by the members. The prepayment by the members, of all those reasons, the prepayment seemed to really resonate with administration officials. The prepayment that has been made to date is $153.6 million by the 20 cities, rural water systems, and 3 states. That's 99.7% of the non-federal cost share. Despite all the good reasons that Lewis and Clark should be a top priority. The administration officials downplayed expectations for increased funding in 2012 or 2013 due to the ever-tightening budget situation on a federal level. There were two small silver linings that came out of that meeting. Number one, that the Bureau of Reclamation has agreed to reprioritize how it ranks the projects. Right now, Lewis and Clark is ranked dead last, despite all those good reasons we believe we should be much higher. They are reworking their priority list. We are of the understanding that prepayment by the members will be a key factor in redetermining the priority list. The tri-state delegation is hopeful, based on that new priority list, that Lewis and Clark will be number 2 on the list in terms of funding. However, without increased funding to the overall rural water program, moving up to number 2 doesn't mean that much. For example, last year, or I should say the current fiscal year 2011, the administration proposed $47.5 million for all 7 rural water projects that are under its purview right now, but only $20.2 million in fiscal year 2012. So a substantial reduction from $47.5 million to $20.2 million for 7 projects. And so we are hopeful that we will move up on the ranking list, but we're not expecting that that will be an influx of money to allow us to move forward in construction. The other small silver lining is that the Interior Secretary Salazar came away with a far greater understanding of the importance of this project. It was clear that prior to this meeting that Lewis and Clark was not on his radar screen. And thanks to the efforts of our tri-state delegation, it's clear it is now on his radar screen. Needless to say, our focus right now is doing all we can to urge the federal government to honor its commitment. The cities, the rural water systems, the states prepaid their share based on the federal government honoring its commitment, and we now need to do everything we can to continue to press that issue. The government to date has appropriated $202.2 million, which represents 51% of their cost share, $202.2 million. The remaining federal cost share is $194.3 million. That amount is indexed each year for inflation. That amount increases about $5 to $7 million a year based on inflation. So each year it becomes more expensive to the taxpayers because of the increased inflation, and the taxpayers lose out on the economic development benefits that come from the cities and rural water systems being able to attract additional business and industry. In the meantime, all engineering work, all easement acquisition for future construction on Lewis and Clark has been halted. Any questions about funding?
Councilor Brown.
Troy, thanks for being here.
You bet.
We were one of those cities that prepaid $70 million. If there is no more federal funding, what does that mean for us and our partners in our partnership? Would Sioux Falls ever have to pay more?
Theoretically, it all depends on the next steps taken by the Lewis and Clark board. Needless to say, that's a nuclear option we don't want to go down in terms of the members completing the project on their own. $194 million would exceed the entire amount already paid, not only by the members but by the states, the $153 million. And so we really don't see it being feasible for the 20 members to take on $194 million to complete the project. So we don't have a plan B right now, and needless to say, we're going to do everything we can to make sure the federal government honors its commitment.
What about those communities that are not going to get water without the federal funds that have already prepaid? I would imagine that they'd have an expectation.
Oh, absolutely. They're extremely frustrated, as are all the members, even the 11 members that will be receiving water in 2012. the 11 members that will be receiving water in 2012 are in better shape than the other 9, obviously, but even the 11 will be paying higher water rates until all the members are connected, but at least they will have water. But needless to say, yes, those 11 members, Madison, Sheldon, Worthington, that have prepaid millions of dollars, that have right now no expectation when they'll be receiving water, are incredibly frustrated. I wish I had a better answer for them as to what the long-term prospects will be. Right now, though, our main focus is to ensure that the federal government does honor its commitment, because it's simply not realistic at this point to think that the 20 cities and rural water systems would be able to assume $194 million of debt to complete the project. But I agree 100%. That being said, we've got to finish it. It's a double negative, but not finishing the project is not an option, in that we've got to complete this project.
Other questions?
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Oh, I'm sorry.
Councilor Jameson.
Troy, are you actually done? I mean, you're done with all your presentation?
Yep.
I'm sorry, I thought you were stopping in between.
That was it, unless there's anything else. I don't want to hog all the time.
I do, just a couple questions. When do we start paying for our water? Whether we buy it or use it or not, when do we start paying?
That's a good question. As soon as the system is operational, which would be when the treatment plant is done, that's the last construction item. So it could be as early as mid-April if they finish on time, or it could be possibly a month or so later if they're not on time. And at that time, the city would be responsible to purchase 25% of its original capacity. Its original capacity is 11 million gallons a day. So 25% of 11 million gallons is what the city would be required to purchase, whether it needs the water or not.
And do you have an estimate of how much that might be, that total cost?
The cost, we are working through the estimates right now. We have provided some estimates to our board, and I want to give a shout out. Chad Heavey, your city engineer, serves on the Lewis and Clark board and does a wonderful job. He has been provided, along with other board members, some estimates of costs, but they are still very fluid, and I would hate to share numbers with you that we know are still being worked out and finalized.
Okay, fair enough. And Lewis and Clark is a for-profit venture, right?
Not for profit.
It's not for profit.
Yep.
What would the revenues that were generated through the whole program, where would they go back? Just lowering the cost of?
Right now, we would only cover expenses, and then we do have 3 reserve funds. And so any revenues received go to cover expenses and then contributions to those reserve funds. Right now, there is no debt service fund, for example, or any other profit revenue, anything like that.
And do you have any ideas of what Sioux Falls could do to help all those downstream individuals who will not be receiving water for some years? Is there anything you think the city of Sioux Falls should or could do?
Well, thank you for that question. Needless to say, the number one thing would be to continue to urge our congressional leaders to fight for this project, to do all they can to see that this project is completed in a timely manner. And they are doing that, but it's important that they hear that on a regular basis from community leaders. For example, one of the concerns from some of the outlying members is now that Sioux Falls and the other cities and rural water systems will have water in 2012, at least 11 of them, will Sioux Falls and the other communities be as engaged in terms of lobbying and making sure that the federal officials know how important it is to complete the project. So anything the council can do, the mayor, city leaders, to make sure our federal officials know that just getting it to 11 members is not enough, that it has to be finished, would be greatly appreciated. So thank you, Councilor Jameson, for that good question.
Any other questions for Troy? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next presentation will be on the zoo management agreement. Dave Fisher, Assistant Director of Parks and Rec.
Good afternoon, council members. We wanted to take this opportunity to bring you up to speed on the proposed management agreement with the zoo and the Zoological Society for management of the Great Plains Zoo and Delbridge Museum. First of all, I wanted to introduce the members of our negotiation team who are in the audience with me tonight. Not yet. And that is Karen Leonard with the City Attorney's Office, Tracy Turback, the Finance Director, Don Kearney, Parks and Recreation Director, and Elizabeth Whaley, President and CEO of the zoo. Also in the audience are Steve Metley, the Chair of the Society, and also Karen Oakland, past Chair. And the other introductions I'll let Elizabeth Whaley make. She wanted to hold true on her promise to bring some of the animals to this meeting tonight as requested by the Finance Committee. So, Elizabeth?
Jimmy keeps me in line. Thank you, Dave. Good afternoon. I'm Elizabeth Whaley, President and CEO of the Great Plains Zoo, and I'm so pleased to be with you today. Council members, thank you for having us. At the request of Councilmember Erpenbach, we have brought a few interested parties from the zoo. We have Lisa Smith, our Director of Animal Programs, with Jimmy. We have Shooter back here with Tom Smith. Pardon my back to some of you. We've got Luna the skunk and Kim Schaefer. We've got Amanda Rayborg and a blue-tongued skink. And we have what I call the two-person snake with Nolan Schlichter and Angie. And Angie Blommer, sorry. I'm watching your snake. So we thought maybe you'd like to have a little time up close and personal with the animals. I know that we have business to conduct tonight, and we're glad to get into that as well. But if you'd like to have some time with the animals and their handlers, this is a great representation of the kind of joy and the silly smiles that we see on now 243,000 guests every year at the Great Plains Zoo. And that number includes 46,000 kids that we teach in very unique educational settings throughout the four-state area, including on-site and through Zoomobiles all around this great community of ours. So I'll turn it over to you to let us know how you'd like to interact with the animals.
Do you want to bring them forward so that they are on television? And maybe if any of the counselors would like to go forward and...
This is who, Bob? Jimmy. Jimmy.
Now, what is Jimmy? Beautiful. How old is he? And how long do they live? That's what I thought. He's beautiful. What is that? And that is really a blue tongue. Can I feel? Now I take it that this skunk has been long. Are they sharp? So now what kind of snake is this? And how old is it? Okay. Huh? Oh, yeah. What does it eat? is she? Yeah, I know. Elizabeth, thank you very much for sharing the animals. Name? Shooter. Okay. Okay. Beautiful.
Back to business, I guess.
Yes.
Just to give you a little bit of background, the existing agreement has been in place since 2006. It was amended in 2010, and there was also an internal audit that was conducted on the agreement in 2011. Our negotiation team has met several times over the past several weeks to reach a new agreement that basically keeps the responsibilities at the zoo the same in terms of what the city does and what the society does. We feel like since 2006, when we reached the new agreement with the Zoological Society, that the zoo has done very well and progressed very well. We think the agreement and the basic responsibilities are right and that they work. And so that was objective number one. What we did try to do is look at giving more definition to some of the areas that maybe were a little unclear, and then also to look at the audit and incorporate parts of the audit that we felt made sense to do so. We've provided you with copies of the proposed agreement, the resolution, and a listing of the more important bullets of the agreement. I can touch briefly on the bullets of the agreement if you would like, and then we can take a look at trying to answer questions.
It's on sire. On sire. For the council members, the agreement is on sire.
Madam Chair, I would like him to go through the bullets if we could, just for the benefit of the public.
Yes. Please, Dave.
You bet. The proposed term of the new agreement would be 5 years, which is similar to the existing agreement. By virtue of the new agreement, the ownership of the animals would be transferred to the Zoological Society for the time that the society manages the zoo. This provision allows the society to manage the live animal collection pursuant to the AZA standards in an efficient and effective manner. A resolution transferring that live animal collection is proposed to be presented to the City Council in conjunction with the management agreement. If the society no longer manages the zoo, the ownership of the live animals then reverts back to the city. This is a point that we discussed at length in our group, and what we came down to is wanting to create the absolute best situation for the animals that we could. And we believe that this is the arrangement that does that. We believe that with this arrangement, the right people who are familiar with the animals and trained in managing the animals are making the decisions with the animals. This also coincides with standards of the AZA accreditation process. Through the agreement, a further distinction is made for funds that become the property of the city versus the property of the society, should the society no longer manage the zoo. In a general sense, all funds intended for the daily operation of the zoo and for projects and programs specifically related to the zoo would become the property of the city. Other funds intended for programs that are not necessarily specific to the zoo would remain the property of the society. Also, going forward with this agreement, any future donor agreements, we would agree on template language that will be inserted into those agreements, which will call for the donors to make that decision on their donation relative to, if the society no longer manages the zoo, where they would want their donation to go. It's also the intent of the agreement that the cost of the general liability insurance coverage for the society, as proposed, would be transferred to the society. Early on in our relationship with the zoo, the city insurance covered the zoo. And the biggest reason for that was that it was hard to get in previous years. It's become more readily available, although we don't know a lot about the cost of it. So right now, where we're at is the zoo has asked for quotes for providing this insurance for the zoo, and then we'll take a look at it and see how feasible that is. The current language in the agreement allows us, based on that information, to still go either way, where we could provide coverage through the city or whether the zoo would provide that coverage. The society also would now be responsible for providing secondary automobile liability insurance to cover society employees and volunteers that are operating their own personal vehicles on authorized society business. The agreement takes into consideration recommendations from the audit as well. It requires the society to provide the city with the IRS Form 990 each year. The animal ownership issue, while it's not in compliance with the suggestion from the auditors, again, we believe through our research that the way we've proposed it is the way that it needs to be, and it's in the best interest of the zoo. An annual report is also to be submitted to the City Council and the Parks and Recreation Board. In closing, the proposed summary bullets were presented to the Public Services Committee a week ago, and the proposed agreement was reviewed and supported by the Parks and Recreation Board and the Zoo Society over the past week. We'd also like to place the agreement on your agenda for the December 5th meeting. Any questions?
Questions for Dave? Councilor Karski.
I guess I have a question, maybe more for City Attorney Fifley, okay. What's the city's liability? I mean, there was a case just recently in Ohio where it was private zoo, basically, where somebody let a lot of animals loose. What if an animal was let loose either intentionally or by negligence? What is the city's exposure in a case like that?
Karen Leonard, Assistant City Attorney. There is an indemnification provision in this contract, so if a scenario like that happened, you'd have to take a look at the facts and see if it was as a result of the negligence of the employee of the society or intentional acts by that society employee, and then most likely then the carrier would provide coverage for the society. But if it was our city employees acting negligently or intentionally in allowing damage to occur, then that exposure would be on the city.
And if the society didn't have adequate or couldn't obtain coverage, would that fall back on the city then? And would our...
We would always make sure that the zoo is fully covered, and so what we meant by that is if the society, if the parties determined that the society's coverage would be cost prohibitive to them, there would still be full commercial liability insurance provided by us. If the society provides the coverage, then the city's named as an additional insured under the policy.
Okay.
Councilor Rolfing.
Dave, you know, I have some apprehension about turning an asset, that valuable an asset, over to a group of people that don't really have the expertise in managing or selling, buying and selling, et cetera, animals. What we're doing is turning it over to Elizabeth and her crew, which does have that expertise. So, and I know you had some questions about that when you got started. At least you indicated that last week. Explain to me why that should be done. What turned you around on that? It still rubs me wrong that we would give that up, but maybe, go
Sure.
ahead.
No, I understand, and I think the group did have some reservations with that, and we looked at that issue hard, and we talked about it at length, as I said. The thing that helps me get comfortable with it is that the AZA accreditation, which we require the zoo to maintain under the agreement, has very specific regulations and standards for how those animals are managed. They're very detailed, and it's a part of the resolution. And so that's something that made me personally feel more comfortable with it, in addition to the fact that it really ties with their accreditation process. And having them be the ones making those decisions is basically what is called for in order to be accredited. So not to do this, I believe, would jeopardize their accreditation. And if that's not correct, I mean, Elizabeth can expound on it. But
So you're telling me that if we would take back the ownership, they could possibly lose their accreditation in an AZA?
I'll let Elizabeth explain a little more how that works, but I believe what it calls for is that those final decisions need to be made by the manager of the zoo, and which in my mind would be the society. But I don't know if that one point alone would jeopardize it or not. I'll let Elizabeth explain a little more about the accreditation process.
Yes, please, Elizabeth.
It's a good question, and it's a complicated answer. Accreditation by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums is a very in-depth process, so this would be one piece in their determination. But clearly both in the AZA's acquisition and disposition of animals policy and in the accreditation standards, it clearly states that the director of the institution needs to make the decisions on the disposition of animals. The other thing that might be good for counselors to think about is that, this is 550 or 600 decisions every year that would need to be approved, and these are decisions that would need to be made in a very timely fashion, where an animal goes for medical reasons, for breeding reasons, for space reasons, and we coordinate and collaborate with our colleagues throughout the country, 220-some AZA zoos, to make sure animals land in the right place. And so it's a cumbersome process, but it also needs to be done by people who manage animals day to day. And that's what the AZA tells us.
May I continue? What would happen if, is there a clause in here that says that if we somehow decide that the association is not the right people to be running this zoo 6 months from now, that would then cut that off right now? And ownership would be reverted back to the city?
The ownership of the animals reverts back to the city upon breakup, and either party can decide that it's not working for us, and I think it's a 90-day notice that we provide to each other if we decide that we want to disassociate from each other. And then at that point, the society has agreed to spend another 90 days making sure that the animals land in the very right place for them. So even if we decided to disassociate from each other, the city and the society would take on the accountability to make sure those animals are in their next best home in 90 days.
Wouldn't that be, and that would be, wouldn't it be better for the city to make that decision at that point if there was some breakup of communication or something like that, that it would be better for the city to know that those animals were coming back to the city rather than somebody that we may not have trust in at that point make that decision?
Well, I believe that the city would know that the breakup was happening and that the animals would come to the city. But in terms of managing, if they're not going to stay at the physical zoo facility and be managed by zoo professionals, then they would need to land elsewhere.
You're talking about dissolving the zoo. If
Dissolving the
zoo
relationship
dissolved.
between the city and the zoo, or between the city and the society. And I would hope that that's a huge what if.
Oh, yeah.
We've had a great
definitely.
relationship across the last 6 years. I think we've worked together to build a very good zoo, and I hope all of this are things that never, ever happen in reality.
And again, like I said to you last week, I'm not looking at you or anybody else. I'm looking at the what if down the line when all of us are gone and somebody says something's wrong here and we need to take some action and quickly. It appears to me then that if the action needs to be against the society or an individual who may someday be in your position, who we may not have near as much trust in as we do in you, and confidence, that person would then be making the decisions of where those animals go and have complete ownership in them before we could take it back. Is that correct?
I don't mean to step out of bounds, and I might be just tiptoeing out onto that limb, but I can tell you that if we had a breakup, the AZA would be in here and on the case immediately. And I've watched it happen in other zoos and other markets, and the AZA takes our professionalism, and I speak on behalf of the zoo profession, they take that very, very seriously. So whoever is at the city at that time, whoever would be at the society at that time, would not be alone. Our professional trade organization would be here helping us sort things out and helping to make sure that things are right. That I believe in.
Okay.
Councilor Erpenbach.
If I could just expound on that just a little bit. Part of the reason that we had the visit from the animals today was we started out jokingly saying, what if the city did own the animals? And I was one of those people that was honestly adamantly against giving up the ownership of the animals. And the more that I thought about it in terms of how would we make those trades and the way that you manage a group of animals that are as precious as these are, the things that you have to go through in terms of making sure that genetics are right and the health is right and all those things. And I said to you jokingly, would you bring every giraffe down here or whatever so that we could make those transactions? And the point then is that it's not just ownership of the animals. It really is the ownership of the zoo and the best way to manage the zoo. And I think we have to look at that AZA accreditation and really rely on it because they are, you know, as brilliant as you are, Elizabeth, and as great as you are at running the zoo with the staff that you have, the AZA has us covered even better than you do. And so I think we have to really rely on that, and I'm glad that's part of that the agreement is that we are going to follow those standards to the nth degree, and I appreciate the work that you're doing, and I appreciate the visit, too. That was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate the invitation. You make a great point. These are not just piles of dollar bills, and in most cases, they're not piles of very big dollar bills. You know, I think we think of these as financial assets, but our auditors, our financial auditors, Eide Bailey, do not even book them as financial assets. You can look in our audit and not find animals valued in terms of dollars and cents. They're living, breathing beings, and sometimes their disposition is released back to the wild. Sometimes it's to go to find a mate to make another very valuable rhinoceros or giraffe or whatever. The 17 endangered species that we breed right here in Sioux Falls, those animals aren't really owned by anyone. There's a species survival plan for each one of those species, and there's a group of biologists that look at the genetics and figure out the very best families to create so that in opportunities of reintroduction into the wild or just in the need to create a Noah's Ark within zoos so that we have strong genetics, they're on top of it. They've covered it. We've got the very best families of animals possible. So it's a very complicated system, and it might not even be unlike a hospital. You know, who should decide when Grandpa gets released from the hospital? When is he ready? Or, you know, a number of other cases that really sort of are more like a hospital than a city. So I appreciate all of your kind words.
Counselor Anderson, Jr.
Elizabeth or Dave, one of you can answer this, I'm sure. What is the process of these 600 or so transfers that you do? What's the notification process? Do you just notify your board, or is the Parks Department notified too of these transfers?
We believe that's at the very heart of the management agreement that we have. This is part of what you pay us a management fee to manage. And so we work with our staff internally to make sure that we're working with our colleagues externally throughout zoos across the country, whether it's a sale or a loan or a transfer or a release back to the wild. And those are not decisions that are made by the zoo board. They're made by zoo staff.
Okay, but is the zoo board notified of these transfers?
The zoo board sees our financials monthly, so they see all of the animal transactions in and out. They watch that line item among all the other line items. But does the zoo board vote on whether a duck should be released or sold? No.
I just wanted to see if there's a notification process so that, like, the board or maybe our parks officials at a higher level are aware of these transfers. If there's any red flags that come up, that it can be brought up to the council or to the park board or whoever?
I do think we have a great deal of oversight. We have to remember that we're open to the public 362 days a year. And so if animals were suddenly not there, I would be notified, you would be notified, our phones would be ringing off the hook. Our zoo board meets monthly. They meet at the zoo, and of course, just like the general public, they're welcome to come there all the time. We have the Director of Parks and Recreation who sits on our board, who receives our financials monthly, who attends our executive committee meetings monthly. We have a park staff person who is on site 5 days a week. And so animals, it's unlikely that animals are going to leave the property without people really being very aware of it. The other thing is, part of our board reporting process is talking about new animals and animals that are going on to their next life. If they're very high-profile animals, we typically don't talk about, every duck and, everything, because, again, like you, at a board level, we really don't have the time or the need to discuss 500 or 600 animal transactions a year. That's what they trust staff and staff professionals to do.
Counselor Entenmann.
Thank you very much. Elizabeth, it's my understanding that you make a report to the park board on an annual basis, correct? And they approve that and then send it forward to the council, correct?
In the past, our contract has stated that as invited, I make a report. And so often, it's more often than annually. The language now has changed to a report annually, which to us means a written report that will then make by a certain date. But yes, I appear before the park board. We have good conversations about the zoo. In fact, we try to get the park board out to the zoo for at least one of their meetings and do front of the house and behind the scenes tours. So we really feel that we have a very collegial relationship with the parks board.
I must say that one of the things I was really concerned about with all of our city facilities was the long-term contracts, the 3 to 5 year contracts that we have, and the oversight to those contracts on the part of the city to make sure that the additional insureds are listed on the policies correctly, all of those kinds of things. I feel very confident after you coming in and talking to us and knowing the park board and how seriously they take their position too. On an annual basis, I'd only ask that once you make that annual report or make a report to the park board that possibly January through March of some time you'd stop in and give us an update at the informational. I think that it's very worthwhile, and that communication really to me is very, very helpful and very useful. Thank you very much for all your work.
Oh, my pleasure. And I'm very pleased for the invitation to come and talk with you at an informational. And just as a little teaser, on December 5th, we will have Chris Beers, who is one of the top people from the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, at the informational. And I think we'll all really enjoy her perspective from, 220 zoos. So I appreciate the opportunity, and we appreciate the opportunity for you to accommodate our guests, too.
Counselor Brown.
Elizabeth, you have a couple of members of your board here. Do you want to just introduce them?
Absolutely. We have Carol Oakland, who is our past chair. and really one of the key leaders in our recent capital campaign, Monkeys, Magic, and More, which will transform the front of the zoo, giving us a new ticketing entrance, which we desperately need now that we have almost twice the number of guests as we had about 5 years ago. We also have Steve Metley, our current chair, and the chair of that campaign. And I'm very pleased to have these two folks on our team. They have provided incredible leadership, and we just have such a good group, staff and board. So when we talk about the zoo, there are lots and lots of people that make that zoo thrive and grow and be the engaging part of our community that we hope it is. We hope everyone sees it the same way we do.
Any other questions for either Dave or Elizabeth? If not, thank you, Elizabeth. Dave?
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve and Carol, for being here today. And thank you for bringing the animals. Dave, did you have anything else that you wanted to close with?
The only other thing that I wanted to, and it kind of follows up on Councilman Anderson's question, was that the dots do kind of connect a little bit from the standpoint of we require them to be accredited, and then the accreditation standards as far as record keeping for animal transactions are pretty extensive. And then through the contract, we've also put in there that we have access to those records. So if there's ever any kind of a question, we can ask Elizabeth for the inventory and for the records if there's a buffalo missing or whatever. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no other business to come before Councilor Jamison.
I just wanted to follow up on the Lewis and Clark presentation and our priorities for the legislative 2012 session. Just thinking about how the federal government is probably not going to be our partner in the future, and Sioux Falls is at the was at the magic spot of getting this line completed, and I'm just thinking that maybe we should think further about how we can help the rest of our South Dakota, at least our South Dakota cities, get this water. And it's probably going to become a state and city-funded project in the future. I mean, we should not rely on the federal government, is what I guess I'm saying. And so we should really plan to figure out how to manage this ourselves going forward, because Sioux Falls has already gotten their water and will be getting their water next year. We just can't let those other guys hang out there. So I guess, I don't know how we add this to our priorities or if it should be one, but I think fortunately we're right at the end of this line, and we've paid and we'll receive the benefit, but I don't know how we can help the rest of the other states, Minnesota and Iowa, but we surely have an influence on our own state, and we should probably leverage that as best we can for those other communities that aren't online yet and aren't likely to be online for some years. Just kind of struck me after he got done, and the more I thought about it, and the text I just received, I think our annual payments are going to be over $2 million that we'll be paying for Lewis and Clark water, even though we don't even need it, which is crazy, but we'll always have it. So I just want to have a further comment, if I could, about how important that is to those other communities. That's all.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other comments from the council? Just a reminder that the joint City of Sioux Falls, Minnehaha County meeting begins at 5:30. This meeting is adjourned.